Hello, Python starters. So today we want to talk about comments and documentation strings in Python. So as you start writing more code and more complex code, it's important to document what you're creating. And to help with that, you can add comments explaining key steps and assumptions in your code. And that'll help you and your fellow Python starters with code reuse. So let's take a look at some of the different options for comments and DocStrings in Python. So first of all, you can put an inline comment on a single line by starting with the pound symbol and then a space, and then you can write your comment as long as you want to the end of that line. If you need more space, one thing that's recommended are block comments, where let's say you're trying to describe a big section of code, you can add a single line comment or description and then put a blank line, and then below that you can put multiple lines, each starting with this pound symbol, to explain that section of code and your thinking behind it, the algorithm. There is another type of comment called a documentation string. Documentation strings are different. So while comments are completely ignored by the interpreter, the Python interpreter, documentation strings do actually take up some memory in the interpreter. So even though they're not executed as code, they are treated differently, and so you need to be aware of that. What's great about documentation strings, though, is it helps to describe to others in a very systematic way the return values or output from a certain module or function. And you can use multi-line docstrings to go into even more depth, and this can be very helpful, especially if you're using tools that automatically generate your documentation. So as an example, let's jump back into our Kager example. So as you saw at the very top line of this, I had a comment, a pound or hash symbol there with a space, and then we added a comment to explain what this is. But rather than taking the time to write all this up, I've gone through and written this in advance. So I turned that first line from a comment into a docstring. So now we basically start with an explanation of what this module does, and this can be pulled out of our module from code, and we'll show that in a future lesson, how to do that, how to work with docstrings. And you'll notice that I've created some variables here as well to store some of these values. So to make the code more readable, we explain or define the first year and last year variables, and then the first value and last value. And I added comments. These are inline comments to explain, what is this? What are the units essentially on this 6.5? Well, these are millions of Python developers worldwide, and the 8.2 is the 2019 most recent estimate of number of millions of Python developers worldwide. Another thing I could add here is a source. That way, if I want to come back next year and update this, I can find out where did I get that information. Let's see if we can update it. Next, we calculate the number of years rather than just putting a 2 in there. We actually subtract first year from last year to get the number of years. And then we put our Kager in here. So last value divided by first value raised to the power of 1 over number of years, and then subtract 1. And then we print that out. So I can put another inline note here. Print the output Kager. And then in this section, maybe I want to describe what we're doing here a little bit. So let's put a comment in here. Estimate the number of Python developers worldwide in millions. And then perhaps we want to give some more detail. We assume the number of Python developers will grow at a fairly constant rates over the next 5 years, given the large number of total developers worldwide and the popularity of Python. There we go. So now we explain, both the methodology here a little bit, but also the assumptions that go into this calculation, and then we print the output. Okay, so let's save this and we'll run it. So if I go up to the run menu, I can hit run module. You'll see that you can also use F5 to do that. Okay, and so there we can see the 12%, roughly 12.3% CAGR. And if we continue to see that kind of CAGR in the future, we would expect in the next 5 years over 14.5 million Python developers worldwide. So that's a wrap for today. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll be back soon.